All right.
So I'm having a hard time. I think the chat only limits a certain amount that you can put on there. So I'm not able to add the chat there. So
do you want to maybe, do you have it in a file somewhere? You can always attach a file with that info.
Sure, I can also read it if we want to know a little bit about them. Well, let's do it that way. I'll read the bio and then I'll kind of bounce it over to that particular person and maybe they can tell us a little more or kind of explain what some of those things mean. So I think we have a combination of people present today. Some who are interested in the field, some who may be in my class, which is an intro to social services class. And we're just really exploring the variety of different people from the social club. And we're just really exploring the different paths that you can take in the field. So there's questions like, oh, do I need a BSW to get an MSW? Do I need, what if I have business as my undergrad? Do I have to go to the same school for undergrad and grad school? You know, just kind of, just kind of information about your own path and what you took, maybe your undergrad and then your grad school, your concentration. So maybe your educational as well as your professional experiences to start with, and then maybe we can focus on some of the questions. All right, let's see. So I will start with Julia. So Julia Greco is a sex positive psychotherapist in private practice serving the kinky, queer, and ethically non-monogamous communities of LA. Julia received her master's in social work from CSU LA, so Cal State LA, and believes in the power of decreasing shame and stigma around pleasure and expression. Julia, welcome. Thank you for spending your Friday morning with us.
Yeah, of course. Likewise. Morning, everyone. Thanks for reading that off. Yeah, so that's basically me in a nutshell. Circling back to some of the questions you had posed a moment ago, I received my bachelor's in psychology, so somewhat related. But you know, I don't have a BSW, and a lot of the carryover, there are some major requirements, but a lot of the social sciences bachelor's degrees kind of cover that. And usually you can find that information online as well in terms of what you need to apply for and, you know, be qualified for a program. And I took 4 years off after my bachelor's as well. You know, everyone kind of creates these different expectations for what it's supposed to look like for your education, which is really bizarre because it's such a personal experience. And also it takes time to figure out what works for you and what you like. But I took 4 years off and I did a lot of group homework down in San Diego with adolescents, dual diagnosed adolescents, and then adults as well with some developmental disabilities and mobility differences as well during my time before I came up to LA for grad school. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Minerva. So Minerva is a licensed clinical social worker with 10 years of experience combining direct clinical care and management responsibilities. Minerva received her master's of social work from the University of Southern California in the health concentration. She also has a bachelor's degree in social work from California State University LA. Minerva's professional career includes working with older adults and caregivers in the nonprofit setting. Minerva has worked for SCAN Health Plan, providing direct care management for clients, including initial psychosocial assessments, linkage to community services and resources, caregiver support, and crisis intervention. She currently supervises the multi-senior service program at SCAN Independence at Home, where she serves as an advocate for the needs of her clients through the facilitation of case conference meetings, as well as the management and advising of care management staff. Additionally, she has done contract work for Alcala Care Management Services, focusing on connecting individuals with needed resources, as she has also served as a member of Long Beach Hoarding Task Force. Minerva currently is making a volunteer commitment to co-facilitate the Social Workers in Balance Professional Skill Development, Self-Care, and Resilience Group. This 13-month program is designed to help alumni develop the tools and skills needed to become healthier by cultivating effective self-care and self-compassion tools to become more productive micro, meso, and macro practitioners so that they can improve the quality of care provided to their clients and their organizations and communities they serve. Minerva has been a guest lecturer at East LA College, St. Mary's University, and UCLA, where she has focused on issues affecting the older population. Minerva also served as on the Alumni Leadership Council for the USC School of Social Work. Welcome, Minerva.
Thanks, Yvette. Thanks for reading that off. Hello, everyone. As Yvette mentioned, I am a licensed clinical social worker. In the bio she read, answered a couple of the questions she posed. I did go to Cal State LA for my undergrad. I do have a bachelor's in social work, but originally social work was not the path that I was going to take. I started Cal State LA with, and I was declared a criminal justice major and was really lost. Took a few classes and it wasn't for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. And someone suggested that I speak to someone in the social work field. They thought that that would be interesting. I went to the social work department at Cal State LA, interviewed a LCSW who worked at a school, started taking social work classes, and I kind of fell in love with it. And then I moved on. Right after grad school, right after undergrad, I did go straight to grad school. Looking back, I don't know if I would have made the same decision. Grad school is a very different beast. And I think a little bit of time in between would have been really helpful. But either way, I went through the program. It was a great experience. And one thing I think that people don't tell you about grad school is that although it's still college, it's very different. The amount of pressure, the amount of work is just a little bit different than what you're used to in undergrad. So I do want to throw that out there. And I can't remember what else you asked, Yvette.
Just educational or professional. At this point, you're just kind of introducing yourself, whatever you'd like to share.
Okay. And Yvette mentioned I do work for SCAN Health Plan, but I work for the community division of SCAN. So we work for older adults in the community. We don't serve SCAN Health Plan members. They are different. So we're two different entities. The department that I work under is called Independence at Home. So everything that we do is work out in the community with older adults and caregivers, but we don't serve SCAN members.
Beautiful. Thank you, Minerva. Okay, I'm going to change my screen. Our next panelist is Tanisha. Thank you for being here, Tanisha. My name is Tanisha. Well, I'm reading her bio. So my name is Tanisha Antoine, LCSW. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Cal State Dominguez Hills and a Master's of Social Work from USC. I have over 15 years experience in the social services and mental health field. Throughout my clinical experience, I have worked in a variety of settings, which include veteran service programs, homeless service programs for adults, housing programs, and emergency shelter for youth aged 11 to 17, school-based therapy program, in-home psychotherapy programs for children, adults, and older adults, community-based therapy programs. In addition, I have trained and developed clinical staff and community programs in the area of mental health to help educate them on mental health illness. I'm experienced in working with individuals, groups, and families of various ages, children to seniors. I have helped clients improve their lives by reducing their depression, anxiety, trauma, grief, and loss, build self-esteem, improve their moods, and establish new relationships. My passion is to help clients toward achieving their desired therapeutic goals. I am committed to providing you with a safe space to help you overcome your obstacles. I am passionate about helping others succeed. As a licensed therapist, I am dedicated to helping you to achieve desired therapeutic goals, promote self-awareness, help you learn healthy ways of coping, and improve your quality of life. I utilize a holistic approach in understanding your challenges and experiences. My strengths as a clinician include being easygoing, objective, an active listener, building a trusting therapeutic relationship, strength-based, and building on clients' creativity. My most common utilized therapeutic modalities include, but are not limited to, cognitive behavioral therapy, crisis intervention, substance abuse, motivational interviewing, and solution-focused therapy. as a team, you can transform and blossom into a new and improved self. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. If you just a sidebar, if I have to step out just for a brief second, we are in the middle of a crisis. I'm sorry. That's why I keep looking down and trying to figure out what's going on my phone. So I'm so sorry. But currently, I work for Volunteers of America. I've been here for about 5.5 years. I'm currently working in the Home and Services Division, and I just opened a new program in Long Beach, a long-term program, a bridge program for adults. I also oversee the Long Beach Winter Shelter, which is just got extended. So we're extended through June. So we help a lot of individuals here. So I am the Senior Clinical Program Manager of this division. And you know, I'm here to answer any questions you guys have. One thing I would add is in between my bachelor's and master's, I did take a few years off just to figure out my path, just to make sure that a graduate degree in social work is what I wanted versus like a psychology degree or an MFT degree. So I wasn't quite sure. But it also helps to just get the experience and kind of get your feet wet to figure out what your next steps are. But nonetheless, any experience you have will lead you in a direction. It'll tell you what your passion is and what your passion isn't. So just to throw that out.
Beautiful, thank you. And you know, it's funny because we had a panel of 5 and 2 had one had an emergency. Let's see. No, 5. 1 wasn't able to make it. And then I feel like a couple of you are also like, oh, I might be torn between. So I'm just so grateful that you were able to make it here. Like, welcome to the life of a worker in the field, right? Like at any point you think, oh, well, this is what my day is gonna look like. And then false, right? It may look very different due to a crisis or somebody else scheduling something for you. So if you're able to only stay for a little bit, I just appreciate even the time that you're spending with us. So thank you for that. And yes, absolutely. If you need to step away, just thank you for being here, and we'll make contact after. Okay, one more person, I believe. So Cristina Sandoval earned her BA from St. Mary's of California in the Bay Area with a double major in International Area Studies, Latin American, and Spanish. For graduate school, she attended USC and earned a master's in social work with a concentration in health. After graduate school, she worked full-time as a mental health clinician to earn hours for her licensure. Currently, she runs a child mental health program through DMH and oversees the integrated behavioral program in her medical center. In her supervision practice, she focuses on trauma-informed care, addressing attachment and childhood adverse experiences. Welcome.
Hello. So I'm hearing that we're kind of sharing our experience on how we got to our current position. And like Yvette mentioned, my concentration in undergrad was like international studies, which is like language and politics and anthropology and all that fun stuff. But what really helped me with that was to just get an array of what's out there, and you know, being exposed to different, you know, cultures. We were able to travel and just kind of seek out what was out there. And I did take about a year between undergrad and grad school, maybe like 2 years. And in that time, I really kind of picked where I wanted to work, kind of like trial and error. I worked as an interpreter. I worked as a rape crisis advocate. I worked as, you know, in fundraising. And, you know, I think it was the rape crisis advocate that really got me motivated to continue my studies. And I didn't even know what social work was. I'm not even going to lie to you. I was thinking more MFT, more therapist focused, because, you know, as an advocate for, you know, sexual assault survivors, it was my job to link them to a therapist. And so because I was bilingual, I had majority Spanish speaking survivors. And there were really low therapists available. And so whereas my my coworker, my counterpart had English speaking survivors. They would get linked within the month, and my caseload would take up to 6 months, just because there were no Spanish speaking therapists out there. So, I looked into MFT programs, and, I wanted to become a therapist to really close that gap or do my part in that. But I, went to a grad school fair, and, I just kind of checked out the tables, and then I stumbled across, the social work table at USC. And, they kind of sold me where they're like, you can do a little bit of everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm sold. I could do that. And so it was the only school I applied to. And, I think it was just kind of like my path, meeting great people there. But it really did help kind of guide me into what I felt was what I wanted to do. Another big difference between undergrad and grad is the money. You get scholarships, you get grants for undergrad, but for grad school, this is your investment, right? And whatever you want to invest in, right, for your life, for your future, you want to make sure, it's the right school, it's the right, career you want to go into, and experience really helps with that. So, currently with that health concentration, now I'm leading an integrated, department within our health centers where there's a behavioral health provider working alongside a medical provider. And so now when the patients come in for their checkups, they also have access to, a behavioral health provider. And that's always been a practice that I really loved since grad school, and that exposure of it. So I'm currently, working on developing that and, just trying to bridge the gaps within services. So that's me.
Beautiful. Thank you. And just listening to all of you. Yes, it is wonderful. Just listening to the four of you, we have the same master's or the same degree, but all of our paths are so different just in terms of the populations that we serve. I believe all, if not most, if not all of you are licensed. So if anybody wants to jump in and kind of, I know that I'm talking two things right now, just like the different populations and licensure. So I kind of want to talk about populations, but a question isn't coming to my brain. So let's just see, how did you end up in the population? I know some of you in your intro talked about how you ended up in the population that you're working with, but if you'd like to share a little more, and is this the population that you foresee yourself working with long-term? Like I know Julia has a really interesting kind of aspect and population, which I think is really interesting. And so the question is for everybody, but maybe we can start with Julia to see how you ended up with this population and long-term intentions with the populations that we're serving.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So probably like many of us have, and hearing the bios of others, lots of different experience. So working with DCFS, working with DMH, and that was absolutely my path as well. My second year grad school internship was at an FSP program, and I stayed there for a couple years as a therapist. So working with acutely mentally ill adults, a lot of overlap with incarceration, substance use, homelessness, and I loved reaching folks that are otherwise oftentimes perceived to be on the fringe of society. It's very field based because folks are not housed, and so there's something extremely fulfilling about what that relationship connection is, and these folks trusting you in a way where everyone has turned their back on them, essentially, you know, and a lot of folks of color. So you're talking about like disproportionate rates of incarceration and homelessness and all of that affects folks of color more. And so having those folks build a relationship with us as a team or me as a therapist was really powerful. So did FSP for a couple years, and then I transitioned to and that was at the Village Family, that was at Pacific Clinics that I did FSP. And then I transitioned to the Village Family Services. And this was primarily a outpatient children's mental health program. We also had foster care, foster family certification. And we also had a program for MAT assessments. And so I worked I see some heads nodding. I worked as a child's therapist for a little while. And then I also started doing MAT assessments. And what those are, basically the first time a kiddo is detained by DCFS, a MAT assessment is called for. So an assessor like myself will go in, they'll interview the child or the children, the parents or caregivers, anyone in the family system, and then make recommendations for what might be helpful for avoiding this in the future, and also fostering healing and reconnection and adaptive behavior. And that was awesome for a bunch of reasons too. So I did that for a little while, and then I transitioned within that agency to working as a program coordinator for their FSP program. They opened an FSP a couple years ago, and so because I had experience as a therapist for FSP, it was kind of a nice transition, and it was a little bit more of the clinical piece. And it was at that time that I opened my private practice, so it was kind of this nice balance of doing, you know, direct clinical work in private practice while doing kind of this overseeing of coordinating for FSP. So, you know, as you can see, lots of different experiences with lots of different populations, none of which I'm doing now. And so the way that this came to be is, you know, private practice is kind of like your ultimate art project. Like, what do you want to have on your paper? You know, what do you want the colors to be like? What do you want the textures to be like? And so over my time, as I reflected on my earlier experience, which was really only a few years ago, you know, I think about who I was drawn to the most in the work. So I think about the young woman who's coming out of a domestically violent relationship, and she's working on navigating her panic attacks and building up her self-esteem and acknowledging worth and psychoeducation around the DV cycle. And so that interpersonal component of relationships. And then I also think about, you know, the young woman that I worked with who had a child at 17, and what it was like navigating religious, cultural, and familial expectations with her sexuality and with her connection with her partner and being a young mother. And so kind of these components around sexuality and identity and gender were really the cases that kind of floated to the top for me in terms of noticing my engagement and noticing where I got the most excited. And, you know, the other thing to consider, so I work with, it's kind of like a Venn diagram of folks. So it's not that everyone necessarily fits this box, but I work with a lot of folks that are in the ethically non-monogamous community, or queer folks, or kinky folks as well. And so those communities continue to exist kind of as an alternative expression, folks in all those three communities. And existing in any of those three communities continues to be more difficult and with more perceived risk for folks of color, for folks that are, you know, identifying in other capacities. And so it's even more stigmatized to really be in your expression. And I exist in a whole lot of privilege. I cannot speak from experience about being a person of color in any capacity, but what I hear from my clients is the difficulty running into expectations around, you know, what it means to be a person of color. And so being able to champion for, you know, what that might be like for them, and encouraging a safe place to be open about whatever it is that is genuine for them in their expression in those communities, just is really exciting for me. And it's such a privilege that folks choose me to be on that journey with them. It's very personal, and it's really satisfying as well.
You're muted, Yvette.
Okay, I do that all the time, and then I didn't want to unmute. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for sharing that. I had a full conversation all by myself just now. Anybody else want to share about population? Maybe populations you've worked with? And I think also something I wanted to add is, do you have to decide, let's say my first year of grad school, this is the population I'm going to work with, and then with an MSW, then you're committed to it? I see Julia saying no, right? I know the answer to that, but I think there's a lot of misconception about the fact that you have to decide now what you want to do for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of your life. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about our field, is that you could shift and pivot at any point, and it's still within our field. So if any of you want to share a little bit about pivoting or navigating populations.
Well, I just wanted to add, just kind of piggyback of what you're saying. That was a deciding factor for me between MFT and social work, because I did want to go into therapy for the initial reasons that I, was looking into grad school, but just learning of how diverse the field is, whether, you do macro work and work for an elected official, or meso work or micro work, right? Direct face-to-face, with people. You can do all three, really. And it just depends on what you find, I think while we were in school, we had internships in banks, right? And it's like, whoa, that's cool to have a social worker at a bank. That makes complete sense, when someone needs, support in HR, or, with customers, so it's definitely something you want to look into, as far as like, if you have your initial kind of gut and population that you want to work with, and that's great and that motivates you, but that doesn't mean that if you change that you're leaving that. You're developing yourself to be a better practitioner and better, social worker, so that you have an experience in all these different fields. I've been with families and children for a while. I think when we can all attest that we, have to put in our time to earn our hours. And if you haven't looked into that, it takes about 2.5 years to get your clinical hours. So, I did it with families and children. So, working with children in mental health. But, do I want to continue to work with that population forever? No, right? Like, we need breaks ourselves. And right now I'm trying to navigate into the medical field, because, that's just whole person care, is providing that initial interaction with folks in the community, and so you just kind of, you can see that no one looks at you differently if you shift, populations. It's kind of like expected in our field for you to like navigate the different, populations.
I'll jump in next. So I have shifted various populations. I started off as a psychotherapist for children, and just like Julia, I was a MAT assessor. I've done school-based therapy, and I love kids. And when I was in grad school, I said, you know what, I'm not going to be a therapist when I leave here. And I became a therapist. So that was a weird, shift for me. And I said, I felt like my path led me that way. And I actually was really good at it. Even though I was trying to avoid it, it came right back to me. And from there, I noticed that there were a lot of veterans. I come from a family of veterans. My dad is a Vietnam vet. My brother's a Navy vet, Afghanistan, Iraq era. And I've seen some challenges, and I just wanted to shift and work with veterans. So that's what drew me to Volunteers of America, working in various veteran programs and seeing the barriers they faced with, just getting services and navigating the VA. It's really, really challenging. And I feel like now I have a better understanding from there. And then from there, I noticed that there's a lot of homeless individuals that came up in the middle of me doing that I couldn't help because I was veteran specific. And now I'm able to help everybody. It can be veterans that are homeless. It can be anyone else that's homeless, and I'm able to serve more individuals. And I'm here still now doing that work, but I am working on a private practice as well. So on the side, so definitely adults is definitely becoming my passion. And I said I wouldn't do that like 10 years ago. So I'm here now doing that. And our internships that we've had, I'm sure we've had good ones and bad ones. I know you all can attest to that. And it teaches you, what population you want to work with. And it's really good to kind of touch in different ones so you can be more well-rounded in your approach. If you're doing therapy or a case manager, whatever it is you're doing, it kind of prepares you for all of it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit. So what would be a good way to gain experience in the field?
I think that one of the best ways to gain experience is to volunteer. If you're interested in going into social work, but don't know what it is, like Christina mentioned earlier, I kind of fell into social work. I had no clue what social work was when I got my bachelor's degree. I had never heard of there being a degree in social work. Most people hear social workers and think we are the people who take children away. And that is kind of the only thing that people think of. But when you start to realize everything that you can do in the field of social work, like everyone has shared, it really opens up your ability to do different things. And so I think volunteering, if you are interested in a certain population, you can find agencies that take volunteers. That's a great way to expose yourself. You can look for internships if you are at that point in your schoolwork. I think that's the best way also to really get exposed to more. With volunteer experience, there's only so much that you'll be able to do because companies do have to be careful because of liability and things like that. But if you are able to get an internship, that is also a great way to get experience and be open. I think that that's the other thing. Sometimes we box ourselves in that we want to work with a specific population and aren't open to trying different things. And I think that the best way to know if a population is a good fit for you is to be able to try different areas. Everyone shared a little bit of how they started, and I was kind of in the same boat. When I was in grad school, or when I graduated from grad school, I wanted to work either in a hospital or with families and children. I never wanted to work with older adults. Older adults were not even in my radar. But I was open when I was interviewing. I found this job at SCAN. I now love working with older adults. I can't imagine not working with them. So just being open, I think, is something that's going to help you as you try to get that experience.
Just wanted to quickly answer. I think it goes along with this. Christina, you had a question about how do we, like if we want to work with a specific population. And I just put in the chat, CAST LA, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Human Trafficking. I worked with them really briefly at my last employment where they contracted with medical providers, trained them to identify, kind of key behaviors or marks on individuals, because unfortunately some people are branded, and being able to identify them and get them linked to services when they come in for their physicals, and they're a great organization. But I think that if we do kind of put our blinders to just one population, it's not, if we stray away, we'll lose, experience. If you get licensed, you have to do direct work, right? If I want to do macro work and I want to work on policies, for that, specific population, right? Human trafficking, and I want to get licensed, I do have to do direct work, right? So it's a means to an end, right? like, yes, I want to work there, and I know my license is going to like help me get there, or whatever the steps you envision for yourself. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to get there. It just means this is what I need to do right now in order to get there, right? So I had to do direct work for 2.5 years, and I did it longer than I needed to, but you know, it was a means to an end, right? For you to get to where you wanted to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I have a couple more questions, but I love that there's like conversations like verbally, and then there's chat. So I'm going to kind of start from the bottom and go up, since I know that some of those questions in the chat were already answered. So Lindsay wants to know if you want to work in a hospital setting, and from listening to your intros, I think 2 of you did health. So half of you did health. So if you want to work in a hospital setting, do you need a clinical social work, or can you just do BSW or MSW? I'm guessing, do you need to do, do you have to be licensed? I'm assuming is that question. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay. But do you need to be licensed to do work in the hospital setting?
To work in well, it depends what role you want. You definitely can have a BSW and work in a hospital setting. There's positions, you know, for case management and triage. If you want to do clinical work, then you do need a license, and it falls into the whole billing, right? So we want our positions to be sustainable. We don't want to live off of a grant, right? Where it's like you get a grant and it's for a year, but then you don't know what's going to happen to your position after a year, right? So you want to make sure that you also take care of yourself, right? Where it's like, I know that, you know, I'm bringing value to this. And so I want my position to be sustainable. I don't want it to depend on a grant. Maybe it can start off that way, but I want it to be sustainable, right? So for my own peace of mind, so you definitely can work in a hospital setting, you know, but it just depends what role you want.
Would anyone like that?
Oh, so yeah, what I was going to add, the other thing is that hospitals do require you to have 1 year experience in a hospital setting or in a health setting, which is sometimes why it's so difficult to get in, because it's hard to, you know, some hospitals are very specific about what they're looking for. But like Christina said, yes, there is ways. And as an MSW, you can get hired to provide therapy as you accrue your hours for licensure. But I think that that is one of the things, even when I've looked now as a licensed individual, you know, they do require a certain amount of years of experience. So, you know, that's kind of going back to where volunteering at a hospital would really help you if you know that that's something that you want to do.
I also had a friend who had her 2nd year internship for her MSW program at a hospital. And so then she was able to kind of have an offer of employment because of her experience as an intern. And she, of course, was unlicensed at that time and accrued hours in that position working as an MSW. And then she probably had some kind of a title change or position change once she became licensed, but she was able to do that way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Another question is, maybe starting at the bottom was a bad idea because the bottom keeps staying at the bottom, but we'll start it at the bottom here. Now we're here, right? Just kidding. So are there certain places that will give you an opportunity to work after graduating from a community college, meanwhile continuing school?
I can chime in on that. I would say, yes, there can be, but you would have to look at the schedule for that particular agency. I know a lot of people in grad school, it's hard, you know, to work a full-time job and go to school. I did it, but I had no choice because I came from a low-income family and I have responsibilities, unfortunately. So I had to continue to work. For me personally, I worked at like a group home and I worked like a graveyard shift. So I would go from graveyard shift, few hours of sleep to internship to school, you know, some days. And so it's not easy, but if you find a job that, can accommodate it, it could work. But I also did 3-year part-time at USC. So my first year was part-time, and then I bumped up to a full-time student. So it just depends on what you're looking for and what you need. It's based on your personal preference.
Thank you. How soon after receiving your degree were you able to find employment or settle yourself with an employer? I know that Tanisha already answered that in the chat, but I wanted to open it up to see if anybody else wanted to add.
I can speak on that briefly. So there are a couple different stipends for, and I wonder if it's MFTs now that I'm saying this, but I know it's for sure for MSWs, and there's a stipend for DMH and there's a stipend for DCFS. And basically they say, hey, we'll give you this much money. For the DMH stipend, I think it was $20,000 that you can use toward tuition in your last year if you agree to work for us, paid like as a job for, I think it was 1 year. So that, because I received that, fortunately, I was able to kind of transition my internship over to a job. And I saw someone say something similarly in the chat about kind of getting it arranged before graduation again. And, I was able to kind of just go straight into a position with my internship. So I was already familiar with them. They were already familiar with me. And it was pretty easy that way.
When we graduated back in 2010, it was the middle of the economy wasn't doing very well. So it was tough to find work. I think that it took me about 1.5 to 2 months after graduation, but I would say that was not the case for a lot of the people that we graduated with. It was very tough. So I think that that's one of the things to consider that's something that's out of your control, but that may delay how quickly you can get a job. But I think that one of the things that is helpful for a lot of individuals is doing very well in their internships, where that can lead into a permanent job. Where I currently work at, when an intern does very well, most of the time they get hired on. So I think that if you're able to do that, that is going to be a big help to you.
Thank you. I think just to add to that, I think it also depends what you're looking to do. So it took me 5 months, but because I knew I didn't want to do clinical, I didn't want to do therapy. So it took me a little longer, but because I was being a little more particular about what I was looking for. So it depends. Are you being a little more flexible? Are you, really searching for something? It really depends.
And I just want to add one thing. In between the time I looked for work after receiving my degree, I did volunteer work, like Minerva was saying, just to keep busy and to have something, no gaps, in like employment or anything. But I did do some volunteering at different places, and actually that helped lead me to the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Christina, you responded to Tina's message about agency, working with human and child human sex trafficking. Let's see. As a social worker, a person who wants to be a social worker, what policy and procedures are set in place to end child sex trafficking in the DCFS system? If anybody knows about that, I know that none of you currently work with DCFS, but do you want me to repeat that question from the student? So as a social worker, a person who wants to be a social worker, what policy and procedures are set in place to end child sex trafficking in DCFS?
I can't speak specifically to that because I'm not familiar with what the laws are, but just, something that immediately comes to mind is, of course, we're all mandated reporters. And so any type of abuse or neglect, is something that we're all mandated to report. And that doesn't mean that you can prove it, that you have all of the information, that you know exactly who did what. And it just means that you might have a hunch that something peculiar is going on. And that of course stems into any version of sexual abuse or sexual exploitation. I think there are more stringent laws for what might be considered sex trafficking, of course, or human trafficking. But that's just the first thing that kind of comes to mind in terms of the information we might get as direct service folks to any kind of abuse that might be happening within a family system.
Thank you. I think there's also a unit at DCFS that works in particular with that population.
Yeah, there is. I looked into it. That's the unit that I want to study on, but you have to get your master's for that one. It's Title II level.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing your research. You know where you're headed. And doing your research is really important. Unfortunately, though, sometimes, not unfortunately, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to start it that way. Fortunately, you can start in various positions within DCFS and then move up to those like the second tier. So it's not like you have to jump in, and it is a bureaucracy, and there's like applications and tests and all of that. And so sometimes it's easier to move within rather than jump into. So there are options possibly that you could even start looking into now. And I know during pre-COVID times, long time ago, you could volunteer for DCFS at the offices. And so that might be another way to shadow or, kind of explore what the unit does. So another question is child trauma I guess the topic is child trauma due to separation of parents. How can we make the best of the situation, especially during these hard times? How to change a fixed mindset to a growth mindset on adults and kids, especially on kids. So I think that's a two-tiered or two questions. So in terms of separation of children and parents, how can we, I'm guessing within DCFS, I was thinking the border, but maybe in terms of DCFS and like placement into alternate homes. So just in terms of foster care, maybe is the question.
I can touch on that a little bit, and this might be information that Tanisha's familiar with as well, but from the perspective of doing a MAT assessment, which again is first-time child detention through DCFS, they really, really encourage as much parent involvement as is safe and appropriate for the child. So, the perspective is even if us as adults are able to see perhaps some of the abuse and trauma and neglect that a parent has engaged in with a child, to that child, this is their primary caregiver. And it's kind of like, it's hard for them to see that clearly. They can do no wrong in their eyes. They're their parents. So, you really want to encourage as much continued communication or contact as possible. That's why right away, as soon as it's safe, visitation is in place, again, if it's safe and appropriate. And so I think taking the perspective of the child and acknowledging that they don't see things the way that us as adults see things in terms of harmful behavior. As humans, we like what is familiar and we like what we're used to. So let's say something that we might label as abuse or neglect, like, only, not being able to provide for a child in terms of good meals regularly, healthy meals, or even just meals in general. A child might like that they have to get themselves cereal for dinner. That just might be normal for them and they don't see a problem with it. And so being able to take the child's perspective and encourage as much contact with the primary caregivers or the parents as is healthy and safe, I think is the least jarring for the child during a transition where they are potentially being removed. And also avoiding, psychoeducation has its place, but really being mindful about the way that you discuss parents' behavior with the child so that you're not essentially bad mouthing, the parents. It's kind of like if there's a separation within a parental unit, mom shouldn't talk badly about partner B and partner B shouldn't talk badly about mom or whatever, because from the child's perspective, they don't see it that way and they just feel unsafe with that kind of information.
Thank you for that. Okay, so Tanisha, you just responded to Zoe. So the question was, can you elaborate on your role practicing holistic care and ACEs and trauma in your work? I'm going to just read what you wrote, and if you want to add anything else. To use a holistic approach, you must look at the mind, body, and spirit. Oftentimes our clients just do not come into our office with one issue. They have multiple challenges. As a holistic approach, we be sure they have basic needs met. This may include, but not limited to, medical, legal, housing, etc. Trauma-informed care is a training that I recommend to ensure that a clinician or a provider does not re-traumatize the client. Trauma is big in the homeless community. Absolutely, thank you. Something else that I thought of earlier was when we're talking about population, let's say you say, I want to work with veterans. It doesn't mean that you're only going to work with veterans as veterans being their only hat, right? You might work with veterans being involved with DCFS or homeless or involved with substance abuse, or so sexuality. There might be somebody who's trans in the military or gay in the middle, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm going to work with this population and that's it. There's overlap of all the populations because we wear all the different hats. So I think that that's also refreshing, because as you're working with one population, you might dabble into another one and say, I'm kind of curious about that one too. So yes, is there anything anybody would like to add to Tanisha's response about holistic or ACE or trauma? I know that Christina, you mentioned ACE, the ACEs being part of your work currently. And we watched, at least those of us who are from my classes, we talked about the ACE study, and we watched Dr. Nadine Burke's TED Talk. So we're a little versed on that.
Yeah, I'm really excited because our health centers are finally being trained in the ACE screening, and I'm kind of gently nudging trauma-informed care. And for those of you who know about that, it's basically seeing the person in front of you as seeing them with empathy, right? We don't know what they've been through, and so we're going to treat them as such, right? So instead of, why are you doing this? It's, I'm seeing this is happening. Can you tell me more, right? So it's just all these clinical terms that we know, but now we want the doctors to do it. Now we want the MA to do it. Now we want the, admin to do it. We want the security guard to do it, right? This isn't a mental health thing. This is a whole, agency thing, where the moment you step into the agency, the security guard will treat you with a trauma-informed approach, right? And you'll get that treatment throughout, your services. And so regarding the ACE, it is really important to, start educating our communities about, all these adverse experiences that their child or even them as adults have impacted their health, and steps to correct that, right? It's not like, oh, well, you have a score of 10, like you're screwed. No, it's about, okay, we have a score of 10. Now what can we do, right? And so it's giving them that knowledge, right? So they can choose different paths, so they can choose different outcomes for their child. And then, the next generation of that family will benefit as well, right? So it's that intergenerational practice, right? And challenging and changing that. So it's really exciting. And, some of our medical providers are really excited, they're just inhaling it and it makes sense to them. But it does take a while to change culture, right? It takes a long time, but, you have to kind of stay on it instead of like, well, they didn't get on board. No, it's about really changing the culture of the agency, because, I'm sure the others have noticed, if they've gone through that training, that, the little things, an example I can give you of a trauma-informed approach in your doctor's office is, when you go in and, they check your vitals, right? And they just kind of grab your arm and just kind of slap the thing on you, right? And they yell out a number and you don't know what the number is, right? So a trauma-informed approach is to let them know, okay, I'm gonna need your arm, I'm gonna wrap this around you, the number I'm gonna tell you is this, it's gonna mean that. So it's really walking that person through it instead of just kind of like, oh, another number, like next, right? And it makes a big difference with their experience. And they're gonna keep coming back, so.
Thank you. Does anyone want, for those of us, okay, let me start over. So I mentioned that some of us may be aware of what ACEs are. Can somebody explain what they are for somebody who, maybe doesn't know what that is? Am I on mute? For a second, I freaked out a little bit. Anybody? I mean, I'm happy. Go ahead.
Okay. So the ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And through much research, they've created this screening of 10 questions. And as you fill it out, you're gonna, kind of total up how many, you have, right? And so there's two versions. There's the de-identified and the identified. The de-identified is you just give me the number, don't tell me which one, right? And that way, the person completing it, can have a little privacy, right? Where it's like, I'm not ready to tell you which ones, we're not there yet, but this is my number, right? So out of 10, my score is 3, right? And the identified version, you check off which ones. And the reason that some providers like that one is because then they can specify what resources to support you with, right? And it also, there's a little level of concern, right? It's kind of like, do I have to report something? Like, what if this is happening right now, right? And so the discussion on both of them is ongoing, but there's two versions, right? And there's one for a child and there's one for an adult. So we're specifically doing the child one. And once you have your score, right, then we talk about the impact of that, as you've watched the TED Talk, right, Dr. Burke talks about the score of 4 or more, right? And how the impact of, a high level or a high score can impact your health. And I'm not even gonna touch on that because, out of my scope of practice, but it just impacts your health as you get older. So what the doctors do, the medical providers, because that's my experience only, they start talking about toxic stress, right? So, adverse experiences, so scary things that happen to you when you were younger, impact, your health, your body, and it releases toxic stress. And this is how it impacts you, right? So the doctors are supposed to talk to you about that and say, respiratory problems, asthma, what we see is ADHD and all these things. And then their response is to correct that, to help and support with that, and it can be combined with therapy and whatnot. But the ACE screening is supposed to support the providers in their medical, right, screenings, right? If I have a kid with asthma and they're not getting better and the medicine is, the prescription is just getting higher and higher, then something's not matching up. But if I'm realizing that it's caused by something else, right, then I can approach it differently. So that's the medical version of the ACE screening. I don't know if anyone else has any experience with doing that.
This isn't pertaining to the ACE, but something that just came to mind as you were talking about trauma-informed care, specifically with like taking vitals and things along those lines, is some so pertaining to gynecological health and wellness screenings, some clinics, because of what a high rate of sexual assault and abuse folks with vulvas often experience, the percentage is very high, a trauma-informed approach to, and I think it's called for every 3 years now if you have regular PAPs, and that would be the cell sample on your cervix for folks with vulvas and vaginas. The practitioner, and I know they do this at Planned Parenthood, the practitioner will let you know, okay, I'm, starting with my fingers on your knees, they're going to track down your thighs. And so there's communication around that. So it's not this jarring experience of someone touching you when you actually don't even know where their fingers are or where their hands are. So that would be another example of trauma-informed care from a medical perspective. And it makes so much sense because, again, such a high rate of sexual assault and sexual abuse for folks with vulvas. And it's really a really helpful and powerful adjustment with an otherwise relatively routine exam. And there was an article circulating about a practitioner who actually allows and encourages their clients to help insert the speculum as well, which is, and I don't really know what the implications there are in terms of, like for a medical provider, if that's, I don't know how that works exactly, but I thought that the point really resonated, which was allowing the person to feel in control and safe with someone else doing an exam on their body.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. Any last thoughts on that topic? Okay. I'm going to jump to another question. Do you recommend to transfer to a Cal State or private university to complete the BSW? I am undecided on what route to take. So what's a good move? From the community college, tell me where I go. Is that possible? Can you tell me where to go?
I think that's always a tough question to answer when it's asked, and it really depends on the individual and what that person's goals are. I think, Denisha, you answered it in the chat. If your plan is to continue on with a graduate degree, then you really need to put that into consideration. Christina shared earlier, grad school is really expensive. There's not as much financial aid assistance as you get when you're in undergrad. And so I think that you need to research the school, research what the financial aid package is going to look like. Working while in grad school is not recommended. It's very tough. Like Nisha said, I also had to work during grad school. I was working retail because I couldn't even imagine doing what Tanisha did, to be quite honest. It's tough. Working during grad school is very difficult. So I think you have to take those things into consideration to determine what the best plan is for you when it comes to transferring. Cal States are great schools. I went to Cal State LA for undergrad. I think I had a wonderful education, had really wonderful professors. So I think you just really do have to think about what is best for you at this point in your life.
Does it matter where we get our MSWs from?
No.
Why? I know.
Because at the end of the day, you're learning the same things in all the schools. The curriculums are the same. They have to go through accreditation. And so one school is not allowed to teach you one thing and not another. You're going to get the basics from all of the schools. The approach might be different. And the professor may use their own way of teaching the material, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get the same information. So it doesn't matter. I think that when choosing a grad school, you have to determine what's best for you. I can tell you that when I applied to grad school, I applied to Cal State LA, Cal State Long Beach, Boston College, USC, and Columbia University. I ended up going to USC. It's a very expensive school. I don't regret it at all. I've made amazing friendships. I learned a lot. I've had wonderful networking opportunities, but it comes at a cost. We joke that we were probably gonna die with the debt that we have because it's expensive. So the short answer is no, it doesn't matter where you get your MSW from. I have staff who have gone through different programs, and they all have different levels of experiences, and they all do really amazing work. So it doesn't matter.
I just want to chime in. A grad school professor told me an MSW is an MSW. So once you leave on your resume, it doesn't say MSW from USC or MSW from Cal State Dominguez. It just says MSW. So like Minerva was saying, you know, you still get the same skill set, but you have to determine what's best for you. So we can't tell you that, but we can give you suggestions on our journey to help you, but that's the best that we can do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One of the things that, so I of course consider cost, as we all did. And then the other kind of big thing is it an accredited school? And the reason why that matters is because if you get a degree from a school that isn't accredited, you're not going to be able, you know, the degree may not be salient in other places, and you're also not going to be able to acquire hours of experience for licensure if that's your goal. So, you know, everyone kind of has their own approach as to what's important to them, if they've got a certain part of town, or if they've got an alma mater that just really resonates with them and it's really important to them because they're family or whatever. But, you know, like you all are saying, an MSW is an MSW. And one of the biggest things for me, kind of the number one, was, is it accredited? So.
Thank you. I know that there's a couple questions in between, but there's a question here that says, is that the case for most majors? Is that true in terms of like a degree is a degree in relation to more than just like social work, in terms of all majors?
Yeah, honestly, I was really surprised that they accepted me because I know like sociology, psychology, degree. It was like international studies, which is like I mentioned earlier. But then, when we started school and I was asking everyone else their experience, I had people who were dancers, people who had like cinematography majors. I had people who had business majors. And honestly, you meet a lot of people who are doing career changes, right? That they were, in accounting and now they want to be social workers, or they were, just doing something completely different and they're having a career change. So no. I mean, obviously it helps because you have a leg up in what you're going to be studying, right? So when I started classes, I'm like, all this is new to me, but other people were familiar, like, oh yeah, I've heard of that theory, or I've heard of that, but honestly, you're all in the same classes and you're going to learn the same thing. So it just means it's, review for somebody else, but you're still going to take the same test and you're going to, have the same degree after.
Thank you. Comment was, thanks so much for sharing how everyone involved needs to come from a trauma-informed approach, not only mental health practitioners. Do social workers or therapists use the ACE screen?
Like on ourselves?
Sure. No.
Really?
In the maybe with our clients. Like, is that something that you use as a therapist with your clients?
No, honestly, it's really new. It is something since Dr. Harris has been what's her title? Well, her title in California. She's pushed for, which I think is amazing. So it's really new. It's just being, encouraged to use throughout, all agencies and medical centers. So we use more of like depression or anxiety outcome measures, things like that. And depending on what program you're in, they give you a list of things you have to do, like screenings. So it really depends what program you're working under. They tell you what are the screenings you have to do. And some are great and some are not.
Great, thank you. I just lost my place. Zoe's in the mental health worker program and we focus on psychosocial rehab person first model. Do social work programs teach from this view currently? I know that this wasn't previously the teaching platform. Does anyone know?
I don't know. I know that a lot of schools do update their curriculums. I know that USC updated their curriculum not too long ago, but I don't know because this is newer. I don't know if they have implemented that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It's been 12 years, 10 years, 11 years for me, so I'm not really.
Well, I can chime in. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that I've had interns recently, and it was something that was something they already knew coming in. So I would say that it probably isn't a curriculum, but it depends on the school they're going to. So just FYI.
Thank you. So Norma mentioned or wrote, hi Tanisha, you mentioned working at a group home. While working, I'm a full-time CNA and our facility has social workers as well as a psychologist that comes in once in a while. Would it be a good idea to maybe ask to shadow them on my days off? I always thought of working with kids, but being a CNA has made me consider working with elderly as well. I'm wondering how I can take advantage of the fact that I work in a facility now and that COVID won't keep me outside of there.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can ask. I don't know what the policies are at the agency. Some agencies, if you work there, you can't volunteer there. Some agencies are like that. But definitely doesn't hurt to ask and see if you can shadow. I mean, that's one of the best ways to learn is being hands-on and shadowing people who are doing the work instead of just reading a book and like, okay, let me see how I can implement this thing I'm reading. It's harder that way. So you can definitely try.
Beautiful, thank you. Oh, Julia, were you going to say something? Yeah.
I just want to briefly circle back to the previous question about the psychosocial and the person first, I think it was, is so biopsychosocial, I think, I'm trying to remember where I learned this, but it's like really ingrained in you as an assessment tool. And I think that was in grad school. And bio is like the body, what's happening physiologically. Psycho is like mental health history, mental health presentation, and social is like environmental factors. And that's like very big, still very big. When I did DMH, you know, assessments really want you to hit on all those things as well. And then I think you had said person first, but person centered is an approach as well, which just means, you know, you're utilizing the person in front of you and they are the best expert in their own life and they're the one giving you information about their experience and just keeping their experience as kind of the focus. Those were just the things that came to mind for me that I've kind of learned over the years.
Great, thank you. I know that we're kind of wrapping up or getting closer to the end of our time together. So future, what are some things that you would like to dabble with in the future, or where do you see yourself in the future? Just any sort of future goals that you may have.
I'll chime in on that. So I started private practice a little over a year ago. So it was an interesting time to open a business right before the pandemic. But, you know, when you're doing agency work, they're really good about providing you trainings and helping get you oriented to kind of what your perspective and your lens should be. And so now transitioning into this space, it's had me asking that exact question of, okay, what do I want this time to look for myself? What do I need to equip myself with as a practitioner? And so, you know, dovetailing off of what a lot of these folks have been talking about, realizing the impact of trauma and recognizing how deeply that affects all of us, it's got me looking at different modalities so that I can serve my clients better. And what we find, and what I'm sure you all have found as well in different ways, is you know, talk therapy really requires good cognitive functioning. And when you're triggering because of trauma, you're not existing in your prefrontal cortex in this place where you can think rationally. You're triggered. It's like your animal brain that wants to run away. And so a couple different modalities that I'm looking into is I'm in the process of getting EMDR trained, and I've finished 50% of that training. And that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's really this interesting modality that sounds a little weird, but it basically helps to move trauma that is kind of stuck in your animal brain into more of your prefrontal cortex so that you can kind of talk about it and work through it. So I'm working on that. And then I'm also going to do a, let's see, it's in August. What is it called? Somatic psychotherapy training, which again just helps on on centering yourself physically in order to be present to work through a trauma or to talk about a trauma. So those are a couple of the things that have kind of risen to the top in my work, and I've seen a need for that. And there's only so much I can do for my clients if I can't help them regulate and process a little bit more effectively. So I realized that was a limitation for me, that I can't do anything at that point. So that's something I'm excited to put into my toolbox.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, in our field, we got to keep growing, right? We can't just like, oh, I'm done with grad school, I'm done with licensure, no more learning for me, right? Because populations and people keep growing. And so we also, in order to continue being effective and efficient with our clients, we need to also keep growing. So thank you. And it sounds really exciting. Any other kind of forward shifts or goals?
I think that I'm someone who has been very comfortable where I work. I've been working at the same place for 10 years. My goal is really to try to continue to move up with the company that I work with. I love the company. I love the mission. I love the work that we do, which is rare to be able to say sometimes in this field, because it is a tough field to be in. One of the goals that I have for myself is to eventually do private practice on the side, specifically around older adults. I think that in the field of social work, you hear a lot about the work that's being done in a lot of the other groups and communities, but older adults are really kind of forgotten about sometimes. And so there's a lot of need for mental health services. And right now, because of the pandemic, there's been a big move of doing things on Zoom and, with technology, but there are older adults who just don't have access to that technology. And even the ones who have access to that aren't able to use it because it's not something that is easy for them to use. So ideally, eventually, when I get there, the hope is to be able to come to them, because even one of the biggest challenges for the individuals that we work with is getting somewhere. Transportation is difficult for a lot of them. The older you get, you're not able to drive. And so a lot of older adults need counseling, need services, but the reason they don't have or they don't get that help is because there's not enough programs out there that go to the person's house to help them and provide that service. That is something that I would like to do. I don't know how soon that will be, but it is one of my goals.
Beautiful, thank you for that.
My goal is to retire early.
Beautiful, thank you for that. Perfect. The end.
For me, I'm like Minerva. The company I work for, I have appreciated. I've been here, like I said, 5.5 years. I'm not content, but I'm here. I love what I do, and I love the team that I have built here. But eventually, I would like to be in private practice. So I'm just starting there. I'm starting to do research, which I have, looking into some funding for some of that stuff, and of course have to get some clients. So that would be ultimate goal. But I do want to end up working smarter, not harder. Some of our jobs have been very difficult. We work really hard, and my just overall my goal is to be able to work a little bit less, work less harder as time goes on.
Beautiful, thank you. Absolutely. And like you said, the work is hard, right? I've thought about that many times. Like, why am I working so hard? But because the work is hard. And so I think with time, we eventually start figuring out how to navigate in smarter ways, but it's definitely a difficult field to work in. And I feel like it can be minimized sometimes, but it's definitely work that needs to be done. Any last questions? I want to be really mindful of everybody's time.
I just wanted to comment on what you said, Yvette. We are all in some version of either a working profession or we're studying, a supportive profession, a helping profession, or we're studying how to help others. And that's been a really weird, interesting thing over the last year, because there really never is a time where the practitioner is guaranteed to be going through the same thing as their clients. And so there's been something just really strange about what that's been like, and kind of like an increase in vulnerability, because it's known we're all kind of going through it together. And so that's been a difficult thing and a strange thing, and also kind of a beautiful and vulnerable thing as well. But not that I'm like in a place to thank anyone for anything, but I just want to like kind of give everyone credit for the way that we're all kind of showing up for our folks in our community. And again, even if just as a student, you know, you are putting your mind power into thinking about how to support people during a time where we're even just difficult to meet our own needs. So I just kind of want to like give that for a moment, because it's been hard. It's been really hard.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. Because absolutely. And you're right. I hadn't really thought about it in those words, but you do feel it, how there's this like communal experience. And when you're talking to your clinician or your client, it's like, me too. And sometimes it's really nice to break down those walls and be able to say, me too. And sometimes people just don't want to cross that. But I mean, how do we not acknowledge the fact that we've been on lockdown for a year? So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, especially with your comment on students looking forward and being optimistic about all the beautiful things that they can do in this field. And I always recommend not thinking in this box that our field has created for us. It's always pushing what that box looks like. And then just like the different trainings that you're going to attend, it's like, well, like Portland just legalized like hallucinogens, right? Like that might be kind of pushing the box, but it's in the box. And so really, I really always encourage the students to, how can we improve our field and not just go with the motions of how we've been taught, because it hasn't always worked for all groups. So beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. And so I really hope that the future social workers will really push the limits of that box and maybe make that box a circle or make it look like something else. So thank you for that. I love it, Joy. Joy wants to know what you all do for self-care. Serve on panels?
You know, I think that it's interesting that this question always comes up, and I think sometimes we just kind of touch upon it like, oh, you know, we do this, but really it's something that you have to do every day, right? So I'm a supervisor as well, and I have a few clinicians that I supervise because they're earning their hours. And I had one this week where she went through a crisis, right? And she had to try to hospitalize someone during a phone call, you know, visit, where it's like, we're not used to that, right? Where you're used to being in person. And so she was just having a really challenging time. And then having to navigate the different systems, right? The PET team, and then like all these other, you know, individuals. And so during supervision, she was sharing with me like, oh, this patient, then this, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And, you know, she was just going 0 to 100. And so I just kind of mentioned to her, you know, it sounds like you have the weight of the world on you, you know, and I'm wondering, like, where is that coming from? And she just broke down, you know, and then she's like, I know, I have to save, like, I have to help. And I'm like, but you are, you know, and what's telling you that you're not? You know, and I think we just kind of put all this pressure on ourselves that we have to do everything, and we have to do it perfect, and we have to do it fast, right? And sometimes we do have to do it fast because we have a little window, right, to reach them, especially depending on what population we work with, right? So the population I work with, I know I'm going to see them every week, right? But if you're working with a homeless population, you might see them once, right? And that's it. You know, and so you have your different windows, but something that I always, you know, tell my clinicians, and I have to remind myself, is that if you planted a seed, then beautiful. That's That's what you need to do, right? You did your best and your best is great, you know, and you know how much energy you're putting into, right? And so really using that for yourself, that you're putting in this work and it's beautiful work. And, you know, you have to put those boundaries. Like you, at 3 a.m., there is nothing you can do for that patient, that client, nothing, right? Because nothing's open, right? And you're not going to go drive the streets to go find them, right? So at 3 a.m., there's no reason for you to be ruminating about what's going on. That doesn't mean you care less. That just means you're taking care of yourself so that the next day you can take care of whatever you need to do, right? So it's just really putting those boundaries on yourself, right? And then reminding others of what they are. Like I tell my clinicians, like, I'm 9 to 5, you know, if you need me after that, you know, and if it's a crisis, fine. But if you don't need me after that, you know, ask me tomorrow, right? And they're like, oh, you know, I love your boundaries. And I'm like, yeah, and I expect you to have them too, you know. So it's an everyday thing, self-care.
Thank you. Other ways that we take care of ourselves.
I like what Christina said about boundaries. I think that that is one of the most important ways to practice self-care in this field. And boundaries, not just with your clients, but with yourself and the work that you're doing. It's very easy to fall behind in this field with documentation and notes and feel like you have to work until 9, 10 p.m. to try to catch up, but that's not sustainable and it's not healthy and you will burn out. So I think that setting those boundaries with yourself, like Christina said, she works from 9 to 5. I have a schedule that I set, and my staff knows that unless, you know, something's happening, they need, like right now, they know that I'm away. And if they need something, I will be back at work at 1 and I will follow up with them then. But the other thing that I'm a big fan of, and that I tell myself all the time is, you need to use your time off, use your PTO. If you start to feel that you're feeling really overwhelmed, you're tired, you're cranky and can't figure out why, you're starting to feel like coming to work is just stressful. Before you get to those places, you know, your body starts to tell you that you feel tired. Take time off. I always tell the staff, if you need a day, if you need 3 days, whatever it is, you have your time, your PTO, use it. It's there for you to use. We can get very stuck on wanting to get work done. I have a staff who tells me, oh, I'll take time off when I have a less busy month. And I tell them, that's not realistic. There's always going to be something. It's always going to be busy. So you just have to plan that. And I take days off sometimes. There's times where I need a mental health day and I will tell my boss, I can't come to work today. My boss is very supportive and she understands. So get in the practice of that, making sure that you're taking care of yourself, setting those boundaries, because that's how you're going to last in this field.
And I like to chime in as well. One thing I teach whether it's a case manager or clinician, is if you always want to give 100%, you want to give your best self. So if you're realizing that you're giving only what's left and it's not 100% of you, then you need some self-care. So that's something I teach. But just in general, you know, I always encourage everybody to take at least, you know, even if it's one thing you do for yourself a week, let's do that. You know, I also add in for my case managers, like a self-care meeting. So it's not just that it's all business. We had like for Black History Month and Valentine's Day, we combined it together and we did painting. We did like a daytime painting and lunch, and it was really cool. But of course, 6 feet distance. And you know, you just have to do things for yourself. And I'm not saying I'm 100% best at it. So let me be clear. But I'm getting back to that, and you kind of got to listen to your body, because it will shut down on you if you're not listening to it.
Something else that I wanted to share, and I think I saw an article or a post on Instagram or something, and I felt like so called out. And it was basically like, you know, self-care isn't all just like face masks and baths and things like that. Like, yes, those things are great. It's great to put your phone away. It's great to say no to, you know, social plans that are being asked of you. It's great to just shut down and focus on yourself. But, you know, you're going to notice that that it's not going to feel like it's working if you're neglecting those things like paying that bill or, you know, sending back that piece of paper that's been on your desk that, you know, whatever your school is asking for or whatever. So self-care, unfortunately, is also taking care of some of those other commitments that start to kind of like gnaw at you. And again, it's not kind of the fun, fluffy part of self-care, but the fun stuff isn't going to land in the way you're trying to make it land if you regularly don't develop a way to approach those things that feel a little bit more intimidating.
And let me just chime in on one thing. Thank you, Julia. I'm so glad you said that. But also sometimes you have to plan it in. I think sometimes we just kind of like let it go. Oh, I'll get to that. Or, you know, I'm going to plan to do that, like, or try to do this just impulsively, but just plan it out, put it into your schedule, not make it like arrange your schedule around what you want to do, you know? So just FYI, just add that to that.
Thank you. Yeah, so to add to, or just to summarize what Julia said, like sometimes self-care is taking care of the stuff you need to do. Because then it's like, I don't know, it's almost like when you finish an exam and you walk out of there and you're like, oh, this feels amazing. It feels like summer vacation when I was in high school. You're like, I could have done that weeks ago. All I had to do was turn it in, but like we ruminate or we start like stressing about it and we just don't get to it. So sometimes it is just getting it done. Beautiful. Thank you. I think we're just about wrapped up. I appreciate each one of you eternally. Thank you so much for showing up, for participating. And panel, I will reach out in a little bit. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful weekend. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Everyone,
Thank you.
thanks for
Bye.
having me, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you guys.